So I went to make a cup of tea the other day, and I grabbed this box of tea, and something weird happened when I opened the box. So if you look here, as I start to open the box, it's like something is kind of like holding it back. And if you listen, you hear that click? I was like, wait a minute. This is a cardboard box. Someone put a lot of thought into this. Yeah, it turns out they have these little tabs here that engage with the underside of these two little tabs here. Isn't that cool? I thought it would be kind of fun to use SketchUp to recreate this box, this tea box. So let's go ahead and do that. And I kind of want a cup of tea now. So let's do that. Hey, I'm Matt from MasterSketchup.com, and this video is going to be perfect if you're a beginner SketchUp user. So you don't need any experience with SketchUp. We're going to walk through this entire project, and what we're going to do is we're going to recreate this box right here. So I've always kind of had this like fascination with product packaging, just because I find it so interesting how something as simple as a single sheet of cardboard can be designed really thoughtfully to create something like a box. And this just mechanism where they integrated this latch into the box, I found especially interesting because it really integrates just like the material properties of the cardboard itself. So I imagine, you know, when they came up with the idea and were testing it out, they had to really fine tune like the length of this little tab, you know, because it needs to be long enough to catch the little tab on the lid, but short enough to where when you open the lid, it's pressing, you know, just enough to provide a little bit of resistance, but not too much where it would bend the tab, that sort of thing. But anyways, this will be a great example project for you if you want to lay something out on paper and then maybe cut it out on a laser cutter, or if you just want to cut it out by hand. This would be a great example project for you to follow along with to learn, you know, just some tips and tricks on some various techniques in SketchUp. And if you're an intermediate user as well, I think you'll find this helpful as well, because we'll look at a few different ways to use the different manipulation tools in SketchUp. Now, you don't need to have SketchUp Pro. You can use SketchUp Free in this circumstance. I did look at a plugin that is supposed to automatically unfold objects in SketchUp, and then it didn't work out very well with this particular project. But let's go ahead and look at that first, and then we'll move on to how to do this manually. So you can see here in SketchUp, I have an example that I was kind of playing around with. And if you go to the extension warehouse and search for unwrap, and it's this extension right here. So this extension is by Alexander Schreier. And what this extension is designed to do is try to flatten out a 3D shape onto a flat plane. So it'll kind of unstitch the different seams and try to flatten it out. So when I tried to do that with this example, it didn't really work very well. So it just gives you this message, and it says it was only able to do 2 out of the 9 faces. And to understand exactly why this happened, I went and enabled under the settings for this plugin, I enabled the step prompts, so I could kind of see like each step what the extension is actually doing. So let's run that again, and you can actually access this from the right click menu. I actually can't see it, so I'll just go back here. Unwrap and flatten. So now it's going to step through one step at a time. So it did the first face, second face, third face, and that's it. So it appears that it selects a random face. So in this case, I think it started with this face, and then it looked for the next connected face and straightened that out, which was this one, and then it went to this one, and then that's it. So it seems to only work if you have a number of connected faces. So if I had just a cube and I used it, you can see how it just keeps going around and around until it has reached every single face. So this is a cool plugin if you want to try it on, different shapes that are solid. I couldn't really get any success with it when trying to create this box. So as you might be aware, plugins are now a SketchUp Pro feature only, unless you are using SketchUp Make 2017 or earlier. What we're gonna do is actually do this without any plugins. So you could do this in SketchUp Free or SketchUp Pro, doesn't make a difference. So I'm gonna start with just a new SketchUp model. When I'm modeling this, just for simplicity, I'm not gonna measure the box. I'm just gonna use approximate dimensions just to save some time. And the other thing is I'm not gonna model solid. So I'm not gonna actually extrude the thickness of the cardboard here. I'm just gonna use single planes. So you're gonna see a front and a back face while we're modeling here. Now that's typically not something I would do in most cases, but since this is something that I would imagine you would lay out on a flat piece of paper to print out, you just need that two-dimensional, final product. We're gonna make an exception here and just model everything as a single face. So I'm gonna start out with just the rectangle tool, and I'm gonna create a rectangle, and I'm gonna estimate this to be 4 inches, 2 inches, enter. And then we'll just need to zoom in. You can press Shift Z to zoom extents, and that'll just fill your entire screen with whatever's in your model. So it's just a little shortcut instead of having to scroll in there. Now I want to have 2 versions of this model. So one is going to be the 3D assembled version of the box, and then the other one is going to be a flattened version. So in order to do that, we need to make component copies of each surface that's going to be folded. So even though it's technically just a single piece of cardboard that's folded up, we're going to treat each plane, each surface that is folded, as its own component. And then, maybe later you can explode it if you need to. So in order to do that, we'll use the select tool and triple click this surface, and we'll tap G to make the component. So I'll call this bottom, and I'm going to use the move tool to move and tap control to make a copy. And I'm going to place that copy over here. So over here will be the flattened out version, and over here will be the 3D version. And so then I'll go ahead and do the front side of the box. So we're just going to use rough shapes right now. So with the rectangle tool again, I'm going to snap to that corner, snap to the other corner, and then I'm going to orient the camera so I'm roughly aligned looking towards the green axis direction. And you can see that the rectangle snaps to the green axis. And I can hold down Shift once I've found that lock. That'll just ensure that the rectangle will be placed on that green axis, even if I move my mouse or view away from that. So I'll click again, and this one I'm gonna say is 2.5 inches high. So if you look down here, you can see I snapped to, just kind of by luck, to 2 inches. The 4 inches is automatically because I had snapped to each corner of the bottom rectangle, so that's obvious. But the 2 inches, that was just kind of luck. So I'm actually going to change that to, I think this is more like maybe 2.5 inches. So I'm gonna type in comma because I don't wanna erase that 4-inch dimension, and I'll type in 2.5 inch, enter. And so now I have that front face. And again, we'll triple click, G for component. So it'll be front, and move to copy, and tap Control to initiate the copy. And now this one is going to be flattened. So we need to actually rotate this. So tapping Q for the rotate tool. There's a few different ways you can use the rotate tool. In this case, I'm going to click and drag. So I'm going to find a point that I want the rotation axis to occur on, and I'm going to click and hold my mouse, and then I'll drag the mouse along where I want that axis to be. And so you can see the rotation indicator snaps to the red axis because I'm pulling my mouse along the red axis. So I can release the mouse, and now that has locked in the rotation axis. And then I'll just come up here to snap to the edge, click once, and rotate down 90 degrees so it's flat. And actually the front surface, I don't know if you can see that, has the tabs. Let's see, right here. You see how it has these little tabs to return the, just to give it a surface to glue to the side piece. So actually we're gonna undo that last rotation I just did. And let's go ahead and add those little side pieces. So we'll grab the rectangle tool again, click. I'm gonna start click from the top corner here because I know that I can align the rectangle tool to this edge here in order to get my second click. So I'll go ahead and do that. And again, I only want to change the second dimension. So I will use, that looks about 3/4 of an inch. So comma, 3/4 inch, enter. I'll make this a component. So front tab. Now, because there's a lot of symmetry in this box, we can actually use the same component on the other side. So to do that, we'll grab the move tool and tap Control to make a copy, snap that over on the other side, and then we'll just right click and flip along red axis, and that just makes it oriented, you know, in a mirrored fashion just to remain consistent. Okay, so now we can select both of these. If I hold down the Control key, I can select multiple things at once. Then I'll use the move tool to move those two tabs, tap Control to make a copy, and click to finish. So now that we have the completed, you know, rough shape for this front surface, we'll add this front to the selection, and then we'll go ahead and do the rotation. So instead of, you know, rotating each one individually, just thinking in terms of kind of grouping tasks. So that's why I did that. And then now we just need to rotate each of these tabs individually. So if I just hover my mouse over the workspace, sometimes you can infer the axis that you want to lock to. Another thing you could do is hover over a surface. So if I hover over this surface here, that's the green axis. That's what I want to rotate that little tab along. So whenever you find an inference that you want, if you just hold down the Shift key, that locks that inference in place, and then you can go over to wherever you want to rotate from. So in this case, it's actually locking to the plane itself and not the axis. So I actually want just the axis. So I'm going to hover over that and click, and then I'll rotate that, and I'll just do the same here. So select tool, Q for rotate. This time I'll just drag out and rotate there. Okay, so the back side of the box is pretty much identical to the front, with the exception of the tabs and this little cutout here. So we can start by just copying what we already did in the front, and then we can just make it unique as we need to. So with the select tool and just holding down Control, I will select those, and then with the move tool, click to start, tap Control to initiate copy, and click to finish there. And I will do a right click, flip along green direction, and then I just need to make a final adjustment. Now, we just realized that the back is slightly different than the front. So we're gonna select just that back face. We'll right click, make unique. And under the entity info window, which you can find under window, default tray, entity info, we're gonna rename this from front one to back. Next, we can do the sides. So the sides just basically fold up from the bottom. So here's the bottom, and there's a fold right here. So they just fold up from the bottom, and there's a small tab at the top there. So in order to prevent these planes from overlapping, so if we drew the side just like this, those two surfaces would be kind of conflicting with each other and overlapping. And obviously in real life, they're not occupying the same physical space. The two tabs are actually recessed a little bit towards the inside of the box. So what we'll do is we will extend the bottom. So I will double click on this bottom component and I'll select the face. I'll press S to use the scale tool, and we're going to scale it out, but we want to hold down the control key. That way it scales in both direction. And that's just going to save us one step from having to duplicate the same efforts on the other side. So we will scale it out in the direction we want to go and click to finish. And now, before we had 4 inches, so maybe we'll try 4 1/16 of an inch. And what that does is that just makes this a 32nd of an inch wider on each side for a total of 1/16 total. So we'll try that. And one thing to be aware of is the change that we made to that component also changed over here on this component. So let's go ahead and model the sides of the box. So this time, let's go ahead and use the rotated rectangle tool. This is going to give us more control over every part of the creation of the rectangle. So we're going to zoom in really close and click once to define the first corner. We will click again to define the second corner. And once we lock to the blue axis, which actually we can do by tapping the up arrow key, of course. So once you've tapped the up arrow key to lock the blue axis, then you can snap to any one of the corners on the box in order to infer the same height. So once that is created, we'll use the select tool to triple click on that surface, and we'll press G again, and this will be the side panel. Now this can be copied to the other side. So using the move tool, and don't forget to tap control to indicate that you're making a copy, and we'll lock it over to the other side, and we will flip this along the red axis as well. Now the side panels have these little tabs on the top as well. So let's go ahead and add those. So we'll use the rotated rectangle tool once again. We'll click once, we'll click again, and we could actually indicate an angle right while we're drawing the rectangle. So let's go ahead and do that. And I would say this is about a 1/2 inch. So 9/16, 1/2 inch. And I'll go ahead and triple click that. You can also make a component by right clicking it directly and select make component, side tab. Now the disadvantage of drawing it already rotated is that the axis inside of this component is not aligned with the surface that you drew. So whenever you create a component, that component will automatically infer the axis orientation from whatever scope you were in before you made the component. So let's actually undo this, and let's do this again. And this time I'm just going to go straight up with it, 1/2 inch, triple click, make a component, side tab, and then I'll just rotate this separately. We'll go like that. And now you can see the bounding box is actually aligned with the tab. So if I double click this, you can see the axis is aligned with that surface. And this is beneficial because when you need to edit a component down the road, it's really nice to have the component axis aligned to, you know, whatever surfaces you actually have in that component. So I'll copy this over. Really, I should have drawn this first before copying over the other side, and flip along red axis. Okay, so here's an interesting thing. So when you do the flip along axis, it's actually relative to the component axis. So in this case, I can't really do that because it's just going to flip it along. It's just going to basically reverse those faces. So instead, I need to use the rotation tool to just flip that where I want it. Now, we do need to catch up over here, but let's go ahead and finish off the top, and then we will go over and finish off the flattened version. So the top, I'm gonna say is, well, it's gonna be whatever the width of the bottom is with just a little bit more, that way it can overlap. So we'll zoom in, we'll grab the rotated rectangle, click once, click again. So if we were 2 inches deep, we'll make this 2 1/16 of an inch. And actually, I need to snap a little bit wider because the top needs to overlap the side. So this needs to be a little bit wider. So if I go, so that's 1/32. If I go 1/16, that'll give us enough to overlap there. And we'll do the same thing over here. Now I could have, or I should have, just used the scale tool like we did before, but I wasn't sure of the exact dimension that I would have to increase it. So I just did that manually so I could check it. All right, so we're gonna turn this into a component. So this is the top, and then we can do the front flap here. And we're just using rough shapes right now. We're not doing any of the curves or anything like that. So we'll need to clean this up a little bit later on. So with just using the rectangle tool, I've clicked one corner and then just hovered over the other corner, and SketchUp will snap to that. And when it's snapped, if you hold down the shift key, it'll remain locked to that. Now you just want to be careful whenever you're trying to infer something in SketchUp. Like if I move my mouse over this surface, SketchUp thinks that I want to align to that plane that that face is on. So you need to make sure you're aware of where you are hovering your mouse. So I'll extend that out to, let's see, what do we want here? I would say that is maybe 1 1/4 inches. So I'll click, and that's the second dimension. So I'll do comma, 1.25, enter. So SketchUp allows you to insert both fractional or decimal measurements. Now this face isn't oriented. I'm trying to keep all the faces oriented, so the inside is inside the box. So I'll just right click and reverse faces, and we'll triple click that, turn that into a component. So I'll call this top front. And then we have these little side pieces on the top of the box that we need to create with the little tabs in there. So for now, I'm just going to use the rectangle tool to just establish the components. top side, and I'll copy that to the other side with the move tool and control to copy, and this will be flip along red axis to orient that properly. Now these side pieces also have a little glue tab, so I will create those. So those go over about 1.25 inches as well. So 1.25, enter, triple click G for component. So the top side tab, and I will copy this over to the other side. And actually both of these need to revert or flip. I need to flip these along the blue direction, and we need to move them down just a little bit as well so they're not overlapping. So we'll bring these down 1/32 of an inch, and then I will actually edit this so it matches up there, because that's actually where it folds in. All right, so now let's go back to the flattened out version and just update it with the rest of the components that we added. And actually, let's go ahead and just recreate this whole thing from scratch. So we'll just drag a selection box over the entire thing, grab the move tool, and copy with the control key. And so we just created an entire copy of everything we just made here. And now we will go through and just flatten everything out. So unfortunately we have to do this manually because that plugin didn't really work well with this. So I'm just using the select tool with the control key, or I might have used the shift key. And then I'll use the rotate tool to rotate that down. And then we'll grab all of this stuff. Control key, just keep holding the control key down. And you can actually also use a click and drag selection window while holding the control key. And we'll rotate that. So I can hover over this surface and lock the axis there. And I'm just going to go through the entire model and just unfold everything that I can. So at this point, we can go through the model and add all of these little arcs and angles that occur throughout the box. And of course, I don't want to forget to add these tabs that I was so impressed with. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll start with this one here. This is the side of the top. So it kind of angles and has a radius over here at this corner. So I'm gonna just eyeball this stuff. I don't wanna spend too much time trying to be super accurate with it. So I will create the line there, and then I'll start the arc from there. And actually, I like using the hide rest of model feature, which you can find in the view component edit hide rest of model. I've actually created a custom keyboard shortcut for that. So I like using that as well. So I will click on this edge and create that small arc. And I probably, I'll do more. I'll do 6 sides or 12 sides. That'll be a little better. Then I can just erase the rest of this. I could have done that a little better and found the tangent, but that didn't quite work out. But that's okay. I'm just kind of eyeballing this stuff. So, and then for the logo, there's a little arc that occurs right underneath the logo. So I'm gonna just guess here, roughly right there, and then just erase that line here. Now the cool thing is as I'm going through and editing the things over here on the box, because we used components, all of those things change here. So I can always look at this flattened out version and make sure that there's nothing that's overlapping, because then you wouldn't be able to cut this out of a piece of paper or cardboard because it would be overlapping. So that's kind of handy to have that laid out before you do all these kind of final adjustments. So these inner tabs also have a slight angle on them. So I'm just gonna use the move tool to directly manipulate the point. So we'll go a 1/4 inch in, and I'll do the same thing over here. So I'm just dragging and snapping to the actual distance. And then from the midpoint, there's a tangent. So if you snap to a tangent and then double click, it'll erase the point. And again, because we use the component on this side, any change I make to this one gets reflected over there as well. Now these flaps on the inside are also angled. So I'm gonna double click there. And again, I'll just use the move tool and bring that down 1/4 inch. And the bottom needs to come up as well. I'll tap the up arrow to lock the axis and 1/4 inch. And you can see how all of this stuff is starting to come together as well. Now at this point, I should add those little tabs that I was so excited about. So there's one there. Turn that into a component. So I'll call this the, do I have a component name tab? No, I don't. Okay, now this just needs to be flipped along the green axis so the face is aligned outward. Well, actually, I think the way it was better, because once we flatten that out, that's going to be facing the inside. Okay, so actually I should probably, I want these to be spaced properly, so I'm gonna create a guide at 1/2 inch, with the tape measure tool using the letter T, and then I'll create another one from this right here. This time I can snap right to it. So I'll move this over to snap to the guide. I'll move this over to snap to the guide. And now we have some nice symmetry, and I can go ahead and erase those two. And so these tabs are rotated out just a little bit. So we'll just rotate those up to 30 degrees. And just to give them shape, I'll bring that in 1/8 inch, 1/8 inch. There's a small arc, but I'll just snap to tangent just for simplicity. There we go. So there are those tabs that I love so much, and I'm gonna copy those over to the flattened version as well. Now notice how I'm making a copy of both of these tabs, and I want them to be in the same relative position on this front component. So this is the same component as this one, just laid flat. So if I select both of these tabs, grab the move tool, and if I snap to a point that is relative to where I want to move those two, I can maintain that precision. So if I snap to this corner right here on this copy of the component, tap Control to make a copy, and then I come over here, I can snap to that same corner on this copy of the component. And now I know that those two tabs are in the exact position they need to be in. So we'll just need to rotate these flat. I'll define the axis, and then I'll just hover over to get this reference and align it to the green axis so it's flat, and there we go. All right, so I'm gonna end it there. If you like these types of videos where I kind of do a complete project step by step, let me know in the comments below. I'd love to do more of these things if that's something you're into. And make sure you subscribe to the channel. We're doing regular videos again. And thanks for watching.